3 days before my wedding, my parents told my fiancé I had abandoned a bastard child. My mother leaned toward him like she was saving his life. "A woman who discards her own baby," she hissed, "will destroy you, too." My name is Beatrice Caldwell. I'm 35, a fourth-grade teacher, the daughter of the man this town has called pastor for 20 years. When I was 17, they told me my baby died before I could hold her. They handed me an urn. For 18 years, I knelt at it and believed I'd failed at the only thing a mother is meant to do. So when they tried to turn that grief into a warning, I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at the man I was about to marry, because he had already found her. And at our rehearsal dinner, when the doors opened and the daughter they had buried walked in, my mother reached for the table like the floor had disappeared. If your chest just went tight, if you need to know how a daughter they buried for 18 years could walk back through that door, then stay with me, because I'm going to tell you all of it in order, the way I had to learn it. I'm Beatrice. Let's go back to the year my father decided what my grief would be allowed to be. Let's go back 18 years to a small town in East Texas where everyone knew his name. The chalk in my classroom still comes in the fat sticks, the kind that squeak if you press too hard. And every September, I teach a new round of 9-year-olds to write their names without pressing too hard. I have done it for 18 years. Marlin Springs is the kind of town where the same 14,000 people see each other at the grocery store and the gas station and the second pew, and where a fourth-grade teacher is, by the end of a decade, a fixed point that other people's children orbit. I liked being a fixed point. I liked the squeak of the chalk and the smell of the cafeteria on chilly day and the way the whole town seemed to run on a calendar I had memorized. That calendar had a center, and the center was First Covenant Baptist, where my father preached. In Marlin Springs, the First Covenant lot fills in a fixed order on Sunday mornings, the deacon's trucks nearest the doors, the widows next, the young families circling out toward the road. And a Caldwell, pulling in late and alone, was the kind of thing the prayer chain had noticed by Monday. I had never once been late. I was the pastor's daughter. I had a place, and the place had a parking spot, and I had spent my life keeping both of them clean. That spring, I had something I'd never let myself want out loud. I had Reed. "You can seat me anywhere," Reed said one evening, leaning over my shoulder while I worked a seating chart at the kitchen table. "Anywhere, but next to your mother." "She's not that bad." She corrected my grammar at Easter, in front of the ham. I laughed, and the laugh felt dangerous, the way joy does when you've trained yourself not to count on it. Reed Holloway was a detective sergeant 1 county over, a quiet man with careful hands and a way of going still when he was listening that made you feel like the only true thing in the room. He had asked me to marry him in November, on my parents' porch, and my mother had cried the correct number of tears, and my father had said the Lord's name in the grateful way, and the whole town had decided I was a happy ending. The wedding was 3 weeks out. 180 people had said yes. There was a deposit on the fellowship hall that we would never get back, and a cake order with my grandmother's lemon recipe, and a dress hanging in my childhood bedroom under a sheet like something waiting to be born. "We'll handle the guest list, sweetheart," my mother had told me, the way she handled everything, with a smile that closed the subject. "You just rest." I had let her. I had been letting her handle things my whole life, and I told myself that was what daughters did. I thought the wedding would be the hardest thing I would carry that spring. I thought the hardest part was seating. That was the last week I believed my own life. A piano sits against the wall of my classroom, an upright the school was going to throw out until I begged for it. And most afternoons after the buses left, someone would come and play it badly, and I would pretend not to wince. That April, the someone was usually my cousin Lila. She came in that Tuesday with her backpack still on, dropped it by the door, and sat down without asking, which is the highest compliment a teenager can pay you. She was 18, finishing her senior year, applying to colleges with the terrified hope of a kid who is the first in her family to try. She played a few bars of something, her own. I think she was always making things up. And her hands moved over the keys the way my grandmother's hands used to move, the same lean of the wrist, the same patience in the fourth finger. I had noticed it 100 times and let it mean nothing. "Aunt B.A.," she said, swinging around on the bench. "Does this sound right to you? My essay, the opening." She had it on her phone. She always wanted me to read her things. I was the one who read her things. "Read it to me," I said, and I sat on a child's desk to listen, and for a few minutes the room was just her voice and the late light. Then a car horn outside, 2 short taps. Lila's face did the small thing teenagers' faces do when the world calls them back. Coralie was at the door before Lila had her backpack on. My Aunt Coralie, my mother's younger sister, the one who got the laugh and not the iron, stood in the doorway with her keys already in her hand. "We should go," she said. "It's late." It wasn't late. The buses had barely cleared. "1 second, Lila said. "Now, baby." Coralie's smile was on, but her eyes kept going to me and away, like a moth that has learned the bulb is hot. When they were gone, I sat in the quiet and thought about nothing in particular, and on the way out, I stopped at my dresser at home and opened the bottom drawer the way I did sometimes without deciding to. Inside, under a folded blanket, was a single knitted bootie, yellow, soft, no bigger than my thumb. It had a mate once. I kept one. I never knew where the other went. The car that took me away from Marlin Springs in the fall of 2007 had vinyl seats that were cold, even through my jeans, and I remember the cold of them better than I remember the conversation that put me in the car. I was 17. I had made the oldest mistake in my father's vocabulary, with a boy named Jesse Crowder, whose family my mother said had no people, which in her language meant they did not matter and never would. By the time I understood what was happening to my body, it was October, and by the time my mother understood it, the house had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that has a temperature. My father did not raise his voice. He never did. That was the thing about him that strangers admired, and I had learned to dread. He sat me down in his study under the framed verses and folded his hands and said, "The Lord has a plan, and it isn't this." "What about what I want?" I said. My mother answered, because she always answered the questions that were too human for him. "Want is a luxury, Beatrice. We don't have it. Not with your father's name on that church." They told the congregation I had gone to stay with relatives, then to a Christian program for girls who needed structure, a word that covered a multitude of sins and explained a 9-month absence without ever explaining it. I packed a suitcase. My mother stood in my doorway and watched me fold things and did not help. We drove east, then north, the radio fading from the stations I knew into static and then into stations I didn't. Gospel hours and farm reports in a stranger's accent. We drove until the radio stations changed. The place they took me had a soft name and clean floors and a window that looked at a parking lot. Bellhaven Women's Center, 3 states worth of distance, folded into one, far enough that no one from home would ever drive past it. I was there through the winter. I felt her move at night. I gave her names I never said out loud. There were other girls there. 3 of us that winter, and we did not ask each other questions, because the questions had teeth. We folded laundry and read approved books, and waited. Once I asked the counselor, a kind, tired woman, what would happen after, and she looked at me the way you look at someone whose answer has already been decided by other people, and she said, "Your mother is handling all of that." I was allowed 1 phone call a week, and my mother was always on the other end, and she always asked if I was praying, and I always said yes, because the alternative was a silence I could not afford. She was born in the first cold week of November, and they took her out of the room before I could see her face. I want to tell this part the way it happened, which is to say without the parts I was not given. There was a long hallway sound. There was a nurse with a rehearsed softness who came back later and crouched by my bed and said, "Sometimes it's a mercy not to hold them." And I did not understand. And then I did. My mother stood at the foot of the bed with her coat already on. "It's done," she said. "We go home Sunday." Someone put 2 things into my hands. The first was a pair of small yellow booties, knitted by a stranger to say goodbye with, because there was nothing else to say goodbye to. The second was a clipboard and a pen and my mother's finger on the line. "Sign where they marked, sweetheart," she said. "It's for the hospital." I signed. I was 17, and I had just been told my daughter was dead, and I signed where my mother's finger was, and I did not read a single word, and I would not understand for 18 years what I had actually put my name to. I kept one booty in my fist the whole drive home. I held Wool because they wouldn't let me hold her. The town we came back to had a casserole readiness for grief, and my mother accepted the casseroles and arranged a small remembrance in the church's side chapel, private, tasteful, no body, because there had been a cremation, she said, handled where it happened. There was an urn the size of a coffee tin. There was my father's voice doing the thing it did, the grateful gravity, talking about God's timing and the trials that refine us. I knelt where I was told to kneel. I was a girl who had failed at the one thing women were supposed to be able to do, and everyone was very kind about it, and the kindness was a kind of wall they built around the subject so that it would never have to be discussed again. Women from the congregation took my hands in the side chapel and told me God had a plan, and I let them, and I said thank you, and I learned that week how to receive comfort for a wound that had been described to me by other people. Mrs. Aldridge, the head deacon's wife, held my face and said the baby was with the Lord now, and I nodded, because what else do you do when 60 people have agreed on the shape of your sorrow? I became very good at being grieved with. It is a skill, and I am not proud of how well I learned it. That same season, I never let myself line these up, not once in 18 years. My Aunt Coralie and Uncle Theo, who had wanted a baby for years and lost 3 before they could hold them, announced that an adoption had finally, quietly, come through. The church wept with joy. A long process, they said. Unrelated, out of state, the timing was just God being good after a hard year for the Caldwell family. They dedicated her on a Sunday in the spring. A fat, happy baby in a white gown. And my father held her up, the way he held up all of them, and asked the congregation to raise her in the faith. I stood in the 3rd pew with the kept booty in my coat pocket, my thumb running over the wool, feeling nothing where the baby should have been. They named her Lila. 2 arrivals, 1 year. I never counted them together. The urn lives on a shelf in my parents' guest room, between a brass clock and a photograph of my grandmother, and every November I take it down and hold it for a while, because that is the shape my grief was given, and I had never been given another. It is cool to the touch, glazed, heavier than a coffee tin should be. I had held it 100 times. There was a script to those Novembers. My mother would find me, wherever I was in the house, and put her hand on my shoulder, the same weight every year, and she would say, "She's in a better place, Beatrice," and I would hold the cool glaze of the urn and let the sentence do its work. 1 year, the 10th or the 11th, I asked her what the baby's name had been, whether they had named her before, and my mother's hand left my shoulder, and she said it was better not to give a name to grief, that naming it only kept it alive. I had thought at the time that this was wisdom. I had thought a great many cruelties were wisdom. That April, packing my childhood room for the move into Reed's house, I went into the guest room for a box of my old things, and the box that came down had the urn's paper in it, the keepsake the funeral home had sent, the little card with the lily on it, and the dates and the line about being held in everlasting arms. I had not really looked at it in years. I looked at it now because I was sorting, because I was deciding what came with me into my marriage. And my eye snagged on a word it had never snagged on before: the county. It was the wrong county. Not the county where the soft-named place had been. Not any county I'd ever lived in or driven through. A name I didn't know, printed under the lily, where it said the cremation had been carried out. I stood there with the card in my hand longer than the moment deserved. Leave that box where it is, Beatrice. My mother in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel, her voice the one she used for closing subjects. Why is the county wrong? Wrong how? It's not wrong. Put it back. She crossed the room and took the box out of my hands the way you take scissors from a child, and she set it back on the shelf and stood between me and it, and her smile was on, but something behind it had gone very still. You've got a wedding to think about. Don't go digging in sad old boxes. She said it lightly, the way she said everything that was actually in order, and she walked me into the kitchen and put a list in front of me. The caterer's final count, the 180 names, the deposit we would lose, and she steered me back into the wedding the way you steer a car away from a ditch. For an hour, it worked. I let the list be the most important thing in the world. But a wrong county is a small, loud thing, and it would not put itself back in the box. I put it back. Of course I put it back. I had been putting things back my whole life, but on the drive home, a sentence kept assembling itself in the dark behind my eyes, and I kept taking it apart, because paper remembers what people rehearse to forget. What I didn't know yet was that the answer had already been mailed to me, weeks before, in a small box from a company that sells you your own blood. It had come at Christmas, sort of. Reed's idea, one of those spit-in-a-tube kits, a couple's stocking stuffer he thought was funny. "Come on," he'd said in our kitchen, January light flat on the counter, sliding the little tube across to me. "It's for the scrapbook. We'll find out you're 9% Viking, and I'll never hear the end of it." "I already know I'm boring," I said. Caldwell, all the way down. He wanted the scrapbook for real. That was the thing about Reed. He was already building a life in his head, a house with a wall for photographs, children someday with my grandmother's hands maybe, a whole future he talked about plainly while he did the dishes. He thought the test was a small bright thread in all of that, where we came from, who we'd pass it on to. I let him be happy about it. I had spent so long not letting myself want a future that watching him want one out loud was its own small warmth. But I spit in the tube to make him happy. And I sealed it in the prepaid envelope, and I dropped it at the post office between the bank and the pharmacy, and forgot about it, the way you forget about a coin you toss in a fountain. I mailed away the truth and forgot the postage. The same April week I found that wrong county, my phone buzzed at school. It buzzed during silent reading. 22 9-year-olds bent over their books, and I glanced at it the way you glance at anything during silent reading, expecting nothing. The screen said my results were ready. I almost didn't open it. Then I did, with my thumb, half watching the room. There was a list. Ethnicity, percentages, the Viking joke Reed had wanted. And above all of it, in a box the app had decided was the most important thing it had to tell me. A relative. Parent, child, 50%. A name, Lila Tate. I read it 3 times. The classroom kept happening around me, pages turning, a kid whispering, the radiator ticking, and all of it came to me from very far away, like sound across water. An adopted cousin shares nothing with you. No blood, no segment, no percentage at all. The app does not invent a parent. An adopted cousin shares nothing. She shared half of me. A boy at the back, Caleb, raised his hand and asked if he could get a drink of water, and I said yes in a voice that came out completely normal, and that was the strangest part. That the body keeps teaching fourth grade while the floor of your life drops out from under it. I marked the page in my own book. I told them 5 more minutes. I have wondered since how many catastrophes happen in rooms full of people who never look up, announced by a phone on a desk during silent reading. I do not remember the rest of that class. There is a gap there, a missing 20 minutes, and then the buses, and then my hands on the steering wheel in the school lot, not turning the key. I did not drive home. I drove to my parents' house, and I let myself in with the key I'd had since childhood, and I went straight to the guest room and took the urn down, and I opened it. I had never opened it. In 18 years, I had never once lifted that lid, because you do not open your child's grave to check. Inside was a plastic liner and a gray weight, and nothing that meant anything. Nothing I could test. Nothing that answered. I tipped a little of it into my palm before I could stop myself. It was coarse and pale and could have been anything. Could have come from a hardware store, could have been the remains of something that never had a name or a heartbeat. And I poured it carefully back, every grain, my hand shaking now, because whatever this was, it was not the daughter I had been kneeling for. I wiped my palm on my coat. I could not stop wiping it. I held the keepsake card again, the wrong county, and I sat on the edge of the guest bed with my coat still on and tried to make the world go back to the shape it had been at lunch. I heard the front door, my mother's heels. Beatrice. She found me in the hall, the card still in my hand, and for half a second something crossed her face that I had no name for. Then the smile. You look pale. Wedding nerves. She took the card. She put it back. Have you eaten? I'm fine, Mom, I said, and my voice came out level, which frightened me more than anything because I had learned that level voice from her. I left. I did not say what I had seen. I drove to the parking lot of the church I'd grown up in, and I called the one person whose whole job was to know the difference between a story and the truth. Reed answered on the second ring. I told him about the box, the percentage, the name. I told him about the county on the card. I heard him go still, the way he went still, and then I heard him become something else, something with edges. The man I had only ever seen from the outside. I think they lied about everything, I said. Okay, he said. Not okay like it's fine. Okay like a man picking up a weight to see how much it is. B, listen to me. I can't touch this with my badge. This is family, it's personal, and if I pull one string the wrong way, I poison the whole thing. So we do it the right way. Quietly. You let me find out for sure before you say one word to anyone. I said yes. I drove home, and somewhere across town, in a house with a different last name on the mailbox, a phone was already ringing, because I was not the only one who had spit in a tube that winter, and I was not the only one staring at a number that should not exist. So before I tell you what Reed found, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it in the comments before you hear the rest. Do you think I was simply lied to? One terrible thing, done once, by frightened people? Or do you already feel it, the way I was starting to feel it in that parking lot, that there was no single lie, that a lie that size has to be fed every day for 18 years to stay alive? Tell me what you'd have done with that phone in your hand, because what Reed found over the next 3 weeks was so much worse than I let myself imagine. It wasn't a mistake. It was maintenance. Reed laid the first page on my kitchen table face up, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, and turned it so I could read it right side around, the way you'd hand someone news you couldn't soften. It was a birth certificate. Not the keepsake. The real thing, the state's own paper, requested and received through the only door in the law that opens for this. An 18-year-old asking for the truth of her own beginning. Lila had turned 18 in November. The first thing she had done with being a legal adult. Quietly, the way a kid who suspects she's adopted does it on her own. Afraid of what she'd find? was write to a vital records office 3 states away and ask who she had come from. The certificate had a county on it. The right county, the soft-named place. It had a date, the first cold week of November, 2007, the exact day I had been told to start grieving. The box for the live birth was checked, not stillbirth, live, and on the line for the mother, in the careful clerk's hand of a clerk who is just doing a job, was a name, Beatrice Caldwell. She was born alive, B. Reed kept his voice low and even, the way you talk to someone standing too close to an edge. There is no death record, not in that county, not in that state, not anywhere I can find. The state says you're the mother of a living person. My hands went flat on the table to stop them from doing whatever they were about to do. The kitchen was very loud. The refrigerator, a clock, a dog 2 yards over. And then it wasn't. It was nothing. It was the specific nothing of a fact arriving in a body. Then, where did she go? I said, because alive means somewhere, and somewhere means someone took her. Reed put down the second page. It was an adoption record. Lila's own adult request had unsealed her file, he said, and it had 2 names on the line where my certificate had a blank. The adopting parents, Theo Tate, Coralie Tate, my aunt and uncle. The cousin I had taught to read music, the girl whose hands moved like my grandmother's, the child my father had held up in a white gown and asked a congregation to raise in the faith while I stood in the 3rd pew with her sister Booty in my pocket. She had not been adopted from a stranger out of state after a long, sad process. She had been carried out of a room before I could see her face and driven home and handed to my mother's sister, who had wanted a baby for years and could not keep one, and who had been in the circle the whole time. I had to put my own hand over my mouth. I am not a woman who makes noise. I did not make noise. I just could not, for a moment, be trusted to hold the next sentence, and the kitchen tilted and righted itself, and Reed did not touch me because he knew better. He just waited. I taught my daughter to read music. The 3rd page was not a page. It was an absence, and Reed walked me through the absence the way you walk someone through a house that's been robbed. He had called them himself, on his own phone, as a private citizen, the funeral home in that wrong county, the one name printed on the keepsake card. A woman had answered, pleasant, bored, and looked up the name he gave her, and looked again, and told him they had no record of any service, any cremation, any infant by that name. Not that year. Not ever. He had thanked her and hung up, and written down the date and the time of the call in his own careful hand. That is how you build a thing that holds. Not with outrage, but with a woman in an office saying we have no record of that, on a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. There was no funeral home in that wrong county with any record of an infant cremation in our name. There was no crematory anywhere that had ever received her, because there had been no her to receive. The keepsake card with the lily was a thing you can order, a comfort object, printed and mailed, signifying nothing. The county was wrong because it had been chosen by people who were inventing a death and got a detail wrong the way liars do, in the small places where they think no one will ever look. And the papers. The hospital papers my mother's finger had pointed to, the ones I signed at 17 with my daughter 11 hours old and supposedly dead. Reed had a copy. They were a relinquishment, a consent to adoption. I had signed away a living child while being told there was no child left to sign away. Reed said no court would honor it. A consent signed 11 hours after a birth by a girl who had been told her baby was dead, was not voluntary, and they had rushed me into signing before the law even allowed. A worthless page, he said, and they had used it against me for 18 years anyway. I made him let me read it, the page my mother's finger had covered all those years ago. There were words on it I had never seen because I had never been allowed to see them. The cold, clean words of the form. Voluntary, irrevocable, the undersigned birth mother. And there at the bottom, in the round careful cursive of a 17-year-old who had been told her daughter was dead 11 hours before, was my name. I had written it the way I write my name on permission slips now. The same loops, the same hand. I traced it with one finger. The girl who signed that had been lied to so completely that her own signature had been turned into a weapon to use against her at her own wedding. "There's no crematory that ever had her," Reed said. "There never was. They told me to sign for a body that was alive." For 18 Novembers, I had knelt at a coffee tin full of gray nothing. An empty urn, it turns out, is heavier than a full one. It weighs whatever you put into it, and I had put 18 years of a daughter into mine. I needed to know one thing more than I needed air, and it was not a legal thing. It was not who or how. I needed to know whether, in all those years across the table, she had been loved. So I let myself remember. The funeral coat was navy and too big for an 8-year-old, and Lila had fallen asleep inside it on my shoulder in the second pew while my grandfather was eulogized, her cheek warm through the wool, her breath slow. I remember thinking she smelled like the choir room, like old hymnals and floor wax, and I remember not wanting to move for fear of waking her, and I remember her waking anyway and looking up at me with the unguarded face of a child who trusts the shoulder she's on. "You smell like the choir room," she'd mumbled and gone back to sleep. I had been her mother at that funeral. I just hadn't been told. The memories came back changed, the way a house looks different when you learn someone has been living in the attic. Lila at 6 on the piano bench, my hand over her small one, teaching her the weight of a chord. Lila at 17, last fall, sliding her phone across this very table. "You're the only one who actually reads my stuff," she'd said, and I had written her college recommendation letter that night. 3 drafts, because I wanted the people who didn't know her to see what I saw. I had described her hands. I had not known they were my grandmother's hands worn forward, one more generation through my own body. Reed found one more thing, and it was the thing that broke a different way. He had gone carefully to the edges of the family, and he had learned that Coralie kept a box. A baby box, the kind mothers keep, a first onesie, a hospital bracelet, a lock of hair. And in the box, Reed said, folded in tissue, was a single knitted yellow bootie. 1. Its mate had been in my dresser drawer for 18 years. "There's a bootie in the box," Reed said. "Just one. I have its match." I had not cried in front of anyone in years, and I did not fully cry then, but my hand found the drawer and the wool and held it, and for a moment I could not speak at all, and the silence said it for me. Coralie had taken my daughter and raised her with real tenderness, and could not, in 18 years, throw away the second bootie. That is not the same as innocence, but it is not nothing either, and I would have to learn to hold both of those true at once. 2 booties, 1 pair, 18 years apart. There was a careful, terrible week in there where Lila and I orbited each other knowing. We did not speak of it, not yet. Reed had asked me to wait until the proof was solid, and there was the danger that if I moved too soon, my parents would close ranks and pressure her, and I would not put that girl in that vice. But we passed in a hallway at the church once, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said the word, and both of us heard it. I wanted to run to her. I made myself wait. Wanting proof so badly you can taste it, and making yourself wait for it so that no one can ever again tell you that you imagined the whole thing. That is its own kind of labor. And then I did the one thing my parents would never expect the good daughter to do. I went to the church to read their own books. Deacon Royce Aldridge had kept the membership rolls of First Covenant for 30 years, and he kept the records of every service the church had ever held, and he was not my ally. He was my father's man, head deacon, the kind of pillar who held up the building my father preached in. I asked to see the rolls and the records of a remembrance held in the side chapel 18 years ago. He hesitated. He looked at me a long moment over his glasses, and something in my face must have told him this was not idle, because he went to the cabinet and pulled the ledger, its spine cracked from age, and he opened it on the table between us. "The rolls don't lie, Bee," he said. They never did. He found the remembrance. And then he kept turning pages, slower, because the records that should have surrounded a real infant death, a burial, a crematory receipt, the 1,000 small papers a church generates when it actually lays a child to rest, were not there. There was a service for an urn and nothing under it, and I watched a 30-year deacon go quiet as he understood that he was looking at a hole. I had the proof. I had the rolls. I had a man my father trusted holding a ledger that disagreed with him. I thought I had time to decide what to do with all of it, gently, after the wedding, in some private reckoning. Then, 3 days before my wedding, they moved first. My parents' living room has a formal stiffness to it, the good couch no one sits on, a coffee table polished to a glare. And 3 days before my wedding, they arranged Reed and me on that couch under the pretext of going over Saturday. There was iced tea, no one drank. There was my father's folder of notes about the ceremony, and then my mother set the notes aside, and the temperature of the room changed, and I understood we had not been called there to talk about Saturday at all. They had found out Reed was asking questions. I learned that later. A detective in a small county cannot pull at a thing without a thread reaching back. And they had spent the week since the leak trying to keep it inside the family. And now, with the wedding about to carry me out of their reach forever, they had decided to get ahead of it. The only way they knew to win was to speak first. My father began, reasonable, sorrowful, his hands folded. "Reed, son, there are things a man should know before he marries into a family." He spoke about a troubled girl, about a mistake at 17, about a child born out of wedlock. He used the word bastard the way a surgeon uses a blade, cleanly, as though it were the kindest available cut. He said I had been unstable. He said they had cleaned up after me. And then, this was the part that turned my stomach to stone, he said there was a signature, my signature, on a paper giving the baby away, as if a name on a page my mother's finger had pointed to at 17 were the same as a choice. My mother leaned toward Reed then, toward the new man, the only person in the room who didn't know her yet, and she lowered her voice to that intimate register she saved for the things she most wanted to land. "He should know who he's marrying," my father said. "A woman who discards her own baby will destroy you too," my mother hissed. Under the polished table, where no one could see, Reed's hand found mine and held it, steady, warm. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I had read the certificate. I had held the rolls. I knew exactly what my name on that paper was worth and exactly how it had been taken. So I sat in my mother's good living room and let her tell my fiancé I was a woman who threw her child away, and I just looked at the man I was about to marry. Because he already knew. That night I went back, alone, and I asked my father the only question left that I needed to hear him answer in his own voice. His study smells of old paper and the cedar of the shelves, and he was at his desk with a green-shaded lamp on, and he did not stand when I came in. I put no certificate on the desk. I did not need to. I asked him how he could do it, hold a funeral for a child who was alive, and watch me grieve for 18 years and let me kneel at an empty box every November of my life. He folded his hands on the blotter, unbothered, the same hands that had held her up in a white gown, and he told me the truth as he understood it. There had been an offer that year, a larger church, a city, a future for the whole family, and a pastor with a pregnant teenage daughter does not get that future. He had protected the work. He had protected all of us. He framed 18 years of an invented death as stewardship, as a hard mercy, as a door the Lord had closed and he had merely helped to keep shut. "I'd do it again," he said, and he looked at me with something that was almost pity. "Look at the woman you became." I asked him if my mother had known every day, all 18 years. He said, "Your mother is the strongest woman I know." As if that were an answer, and in his world it was. I asked him about the offer, the church in the city, and he said its name without flinching, a name everyone in our world knew, a name with a television hour and a parking structure. And he said it the way other men name the one that got away. He had kept the relinquishment in the safe in this study for 18 years. Insurance, he called it. He had always known, somewhere behind the sermons, that this day might come, and he had kept my signature ready to use against me the entire time. "You held a funeral for a living child," I said. He was proud of it. Not sorry. Proud. That was the moment I stopped hoping he would ever be otherwise, the moment a door I had kept propped open my whole life swung quietly shut. They had ordered a rehearsal dinner for 60 people, my father's congregation and my mother's friends and the deacons and their wives. They had set that table to celebrate the good daughter putting her sad story behind her. They had set a table for 60. They had set it for themselves. Reed spread the whole file on my kitchen table one last time, and then he did something I will never forget. He closed the folder, and he left it closed, and he set his hand flat on top of it. Inside was everything. The match that said, "Parent and Child," the state's birth certificate with my name on the mother's line and a living child's date below it, the adoption record with my aunt and uncle's names, the absence where a death should be, the relinquishment they'd had me sign at 17. And the church's own rolls, with the hole in them that a 30-year deacon could not explain. It was, in the language of his work, a clean case. It would hold up in any room in America. "This is yours to open," Reed said. "Not mine to use." I looked at the closed folder and the rehearsal invitation beside it, cream cardstock, my own name in someone else's calligraphy. "I'm not going to ambush my own rehearsal," I said. "I came back to this town to live an honest life, not to blow one up for an audience, but I'm done lying. If they make me choose between their peace and the truth in front of those people, then they chose it, not me." We talked that night about not having the wedding at all. 180 people, a deposit we would lose on the fellowship hall, the same fellowship hall my parents had booked for the rehearsal. Reed said we could elope, drive to the courthouse 2 counties over, be married by a clerk whose name we'd never know, and never set foot in that room. Part of me wanted it, badly, the clean, private nothing of it. But I had spent 18 years letting my mother decide where I would stand and how I would feel about standing there, and canceling felt like one more time handing her the shape of my life from a distance. I was not going to run from a room in my own town. I was going to walk into it as myself and let it hold whatever it held. We agreed only to be ready. The proof would come with me, quiet, folded in my coat. Not a weapon I would draw. A weapon I would have if someone forced my hand. There was one person I would not carry anything for, because she was not evidence and never would be. I had waited long enough. Lila and I sat in my classroom after the buses, the piano against the wall, the light going long, the way it had been the day this all cracked open, and this time we said the word. She had known, in her own way, for weeks. She had spit in her own tube out of the ordinary loneliness of an adopted kid who wants to know whose face she has. She had seen my name come up under the word parent, and she had carried it alone and afraid, and she had gone to Coralie. And Coralie had not been able to lie to her face and had not been able to tell her the truth either, and the not knowing had been eating her. I did not ask her to do anything. I did not ask her to come to the rehearsal. or to choose me, or to perform a single feeling for anybody. I told her only that it was true, that she had been born to me, that I had been told she died, that I had spent her whole life 2 streets away, not knowing. She was quiet for a long time, her hands still on the keys. "So I had a mom this whole time," she said finally. She just wasn't allowed. She asked me things then, quietly, one at a time, the questions she had been carrying. Whether I'd ever looked for her? I told her the truth, that you cannot look for someone you have been told is in an urn. Whether I would have kept her, at 17, if they had let me. I told her I did not know what that frightened girl would have been brave enough to do, but that the woman sitting beside her now would have walked through fire, and that the only difference between those 2 people was 18 years of being lied to. She asked about her father, the boy whose face she'd gone looking for when she spit in that tube, and I gave her the little I had. His name was Jesse Crowder. He had been 17, too. My mother had decided his family was no people, and made sure he was gone before any of it, and I was sorry I had nothing more than a name to give her. She asked what she had been like as a baby, and I had to tell her I did not know, that I had been given 11 hours and no face, and that was the question that put my hand over my mouth. She reached over and held my wrist, steadying me, the child steadying the mother, and I thought, she is better at this than the people who raised me on the truth. "You don't owe anyone a scene," I told her. "You only owe yourself the truth. Whatever you do with it, I'll be glad you did it free." On the bench between us, I had set the 2 booties side by side, the one from my drawer and the one Coralie had finally, wordlessly sent home in a square of tissue, the pair in one place for the first time in 18 years. Lila looked at them a long moment. Before she left, she said, not quite looking at me, that she thought she would come to the dinner. Not for them. To watch their faces in the second they understood she was not a secret anymore. I told her that was reason enough. Then she picked both booties up, and she closed her hand around them, and she kept them. The night before the rehearsal, my mother called to issue the last instruction of my old life. I was folding the last of my childhood bedroom into boxes when the phone rang, and her voice came through warm and certain, the voice that had closed every subject I had ever tried to open. "You'll smile tomorrow?" she said. "We'll have a lovely dinner. Everyone will see what a beautiful family we are, and we'll put all this behind us. For your father's sake. For the church." I held the booty in my drawer one more time, the wool gone soft as skin from 18 years of my thumb, and I set it down, gently, and I closed the drawer. "I'm done putting her behind us," I said. There was a silence on the line that I had never once been brave enough to make before. After she hung up, I laid my clothes out for the rehearsal, and I put the folder, Reed's clean, closed folder, inside my coat, in the inner pocket, where it sat against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I tried the whole thing on, in the mirror, coat and folder and all, a woman dressed for a dinner, with a truth folded over her heart. I did not feel powerful. I felt like a person about to stop apologizing for being alive. Then I hung the coat where I would see it first thing, and I did not sleep much, and the not sleeping was not fear, exactly. It was the feeling of a breath held for 18 years getting ready to be let go. 60 people, one door, and a daughter on the other side of it. The fellowship hall smelled of coffee and warm rolls and the lemon oil they used on the long tables, and 60 people sat under the soft lights in their good clothes. And at the head of it all, my father rose with a glass in his hand, and the room went quiet for him, the way it always did. He was magnificent. I will give him that. He spoke about family, about trials, about the storms that test a household and the grace that carries it through. He looked at me with a tenderness so practiced it could have been real. And he said that every family has its hard chapters, its losses, its prodigals, and that what matters is the grace that covers them all. He was telling my story before I could. He was handing the room a version where I was the trial and he was the grace, where there had been a sad loss long ago and a strong father who held them together. He was burying her again, in public, in front of 60 witnesses, with a smile. I set down my glass. "Stop," I said. The word was small, and it carried. "I'll tell this part." Then the doors at the back of the hall opened behind him. Lila walked in. My mother's hand shot out and found the edge of the table. My father turned, glass still raised, and his face did a thing I'd never seen it do in 35 years. It lost its place. I did not shout. I reached into my coat, and I laid the first page on the white tablecloth where the candlelight could find it, and I read it out, plain, into a room that had gone so still you could hear the ice settle in 60 glasses. Born alive, November 2007. Mother, Beatrice Caldwell. "She's confused," my father said. His voice found its gravity again, reaching for the room. "She's grieving. She doesn't know what she's saying." I laid down the second page beside the first. The adoption record. 2 names. I said them. Theo Tate, Coralie Tate. At a table near the front, Coralie made a sound and put her napkin to her mouth. Reed stood quiet at the side of the room, and he set down the absence. The letters from the county, from the state, the plain official nothing where a death was supposed to be. And he said evenly that there was no death record for this child anywhere in this country. Because the child was alive, and she was standing in the doorway. And then Royce Aldridge got to his feet, not as my witness. As my father's deacon, 30 years a pillar of First Covenant, the man who held the church's own books. He stood there in his Sunday suit, and he looked at the certificate on the table, and he looked at my father. And he said, the thing that turned the room. "I've seen the certificate, Conrad. The church was lied to. Denial needs a quiet room. This one wasn't." Lila crossed the floor. She walked past the long tables, past the deacons and their wives, past my mother's white-knuckled hand, and she stopped in front of me, and she looked at me, and in front of the congregation that had revered my father for 20 years, she said the only word that mattered. "Mom." The room did not breathe. My father opened his mouth. "Beatrice, no." I had called him Daddy my whole life. I did not call him Daddy. "Pastor Caldwell." The room heard the change in it, the cold where the warmth had always been. "You don't get to speak for me. Not anymore." He reached for the room. The room was already gone. I stood, and I put my arm around my daughter, and I said it so that all 60 of them would carry it home. For 18 years, this town called you pastor. Tonight you will be the man who held a funeral for a living child, to keep a job in another city. That is your name now. You gave me one too long ago. I'm giving you yours back. Lila took my hand. In her palm were the 2 booties, the pair, finally in one place, in one hand. 18 years, and the room finally went quiet for her. What came after was not a victory lap, because there is no victory in this. Only the end of a lie. Faces turned. People who had eaten my mother's casseroles for 20 years looked at my parents and did not look away. Royce Aldridge crossed the room and came to stand on my side of it, and the standing meant something in a town like ours. My mother did not break. My father did not break. They sat in the wreck of their own table with their chins up, and somewhere in their stillness, I understood that they would never be sorry, only caught, and that I would have to make my peace with the difference. Coralie broke. She came halfway across the room and stopped, shaking, and she could not look at Lila and could not look away. And what she said was not a defense. I never threw the other one away, she said. The booty. 18 years, and she had kept her half of the pair too. I did not gloat. I will tell you honestly that I did not feel triumphant. I felt like a person who has been holding her breath underwater for 18 years and has finally, painfully, broken the surface. There would be a reckoning beyond that room. There are words for what they did. Fraud and worse. And there would be a deacon board, and questions my father could not preach his way out of. But I did not need to swing any of that in the fellowship hall. I had what I came back to this town to have, which was the truth, standing up in the light. If you have ever sat at a table and been asked to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, if you have ever been the one expected to swallow the family's secret so everyone else could keep their dinner, then you already know how heavy that hall was. Tell me about it in the comments. I read them, and I think the people who've carried these things should be able to find each other. And if this story reached something in you, subscribe so the next one finds you too. I did not gloat, and I did not stay. I took my daughter's hand, and I walked her out of a room her grandfather had filled with a lie, and a few weeks later, after we quietly moved the date, I got married, and she sat in the front row. The light in the church on the wedding day came in slantwise through the old windows and lay in long, warm bars across the floor. And Lila sat in the front row in a dress she'd picked herself, on the side where the mother of the bride is supposed to sit. A few weeks had passed since the hall. My parents were not there. The reckoning my father could not preach his way out of had taken his pulpit. The town that had called him pastor for 20 years had learned what the title cost. But that is their story, and it is the smaller one. This was the warm one. "Is it weird?" Lila asked me in the side room before it started, fixing the pin in my hair with my grandmother's patient hands. "If I just call you Mom?" "It's the least weird thing that's happened all year," I said. And she laughed, and Reed knocked to say, it was time, steady, the way he was steady, the man who had carried the truth so I wouldn't have to carry it alone. Coralie sent a card. Just a card. It said she was sorry and it did not ask to be forgiven, which was the only way I could have begun to consider it. I have not decided yet what we will be to each other. I have decided I will not lie about any of it ever again, and that is the only door I'm keeping open. We had 18 years to make up. We started. After the photographs, when the church had emptied and the warm bars of light had moved across the floor, I took Lila's hand and I opened my fingers in her palm. The booty from my drawer, the wool worn soft as skin. I laid it beside its mate, the one Coralie had kept, the one Lila had carried since the night in my classroom. The pair in one open hand, warm, finally, after 18 years of a single sock in a dark drawer and a single sock in a box across town. My voice did not stay level for this part, and I let it not stay level. "I kept this for 18 years, I said, waiting to hand it to you. They told me to bury her. They handed me wool and a coffee tin and a name to grieve, and they told me to bury her. I brought her home instead. 2 booties, 1 pair, 1 hand, finally.